order
I don't.
at
As long as it's
6
on
o'clock.
site. Yeah.
Okay, so I did see that the voucher went around, so hopefully everyone has signed that, via DocuSign. And then, Susan and I sent out an email, which hopefully everyone read, and I just want to remind people, or people that see the email. Mike will address the, lockdown incident that occurred at the high school through his, superintendent's report, and there will be time there for a limit for questions and answers, with the caveat to remember that we have a special meeting coming up that, and in order to maintain the sanctity of that, meeting, and for confidentiality, legal reasons, there's a limited amount of discussions we can have. Then Mike will be returning back to us with an update to the safety plan in the spring, once all the appropriate meetings with the state and other stakeholders are done, but he'll cover that in his superintendent's report. I will take a motion for approval of minutes from 18 October 2022.
So
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Is there any public comment? Did you get any public comment? No. Okay. So that brings us to, I belong. Okay, so I should have said, I have an amendment. I said the 18th of October. I should have said the 17th of October. Yeah, okay. Reports and updates. We will begin with the superintendent report.
You all. So I'll start with sort of the school safety lockdown notification and communication flow portion of it. And so I just want to let everybody know that since the event to be a lockdown, the debriefs that have gone on through the school have been, the police department does their review and completed that. Once theirs was complete, the high school team and the Bar Harbor Police Department, we sat down together and spent about an hour and a half or so, walking through the process and learning from that and gathering information. The high school staff had an opportunity to provide feedback on the Thursday through Google form that they had went through to gather information. Actually, I think it was just a Google Doc that they were able to put information in. We met with the admin team to sort of walk through scenarios and talk about, from the experience of the various principals. I've received, feedback. The board is providing feedback to the process through Jessica, so I'll be taking a look at that. And I've spoken to students intermittently as I've been greeting kids in the morning since that event. I think I sent a little note out to the high school staff saying, there are sometimes in your career where little things kind of remind you of your why. And one of those is sort of making that connection to students. And when mornings when I can be, I'm out front and opening the door and saying good morning to students when they come off the bus. Had an opportunity to go into the lunchroom and spend some time to talk to some kids. So gathering information in a variety of ways. And then on the 17th, or the 18th, I'll be meeting with Melissa Condon, who is the school emergency management coordinator for the main school safety center. I already sent her our lockdown and our protocols overall for the process of emergencies within our schools, and then lockdowns and communication protocols are part of that. And I asked her for specific feedback, and then I'll be bringing sort of a condensed version of what I've learned from the variety of interactions that I have to sort of walk through that process. I think the biggest things, as was shared today, I think communication was a huge piece that needs to be looked at, and how we do that. And there is a sort of a protocol on the back sheet that sort of talks about certain information officers and who those individuals are and who you talk to. Our school is in a unique situation where our superintendent's office is in the school, and that's unlike a lot of different places. And so when this building is on lockdown, that place is on lockdown, and there are protocols that you have to follow, because of that. But I think it's really important that we pay attention to the importance of making sure that correct and thoughtful information is going out to the community. When there's an incident happening, and that could be an incident like the other day, that might be a different incident, but to ensure that people are getting the proper information. And so I've been in communication with some of the folks that use some of our local news who has the ability to be an outlet, and I've been speaking with some board members who have some expertise in that area as well. So it's definitely an area that we'll be looking at. As I said, in terms of feedback, one of the other groups that I'll be chatting with is bus drivers. They often have great insights, especially when it comes to moving large numbers of people certain places. So tomorrow morning I'll be meeting with them to talk to them. I would just like to thank the folks in the community who have sent me messages, and I have a file where I've been keeping back and reading those and highlighting those areas where there have been real important threads. I think, Chris, who spoke today, sort of talked about one of the major ones that was on the first page of some of my notes when I was reflecting actually that night before going home of what some of the things we want to think about. I also want to thank, and I've said this to students and the staff here at the high school, when we met on the day that we returned. I've received a lot of information from parents, and had an interesting note from a student who just sort of shared with their parent that they feel better now that they know that they know that the adults know what they're doing. And I think that's something we still need to take a look at as we take a look at our protocols, and making sure that all our staff know what those steps are to make sure that our students feel that way. But know that that's something that we're working on directly as we take a look and try to learn from this process. So I'm really looking forward to meeting with Melissa and sort of getting a sense of where we stand and what her experience is through a variety of emergency circumstances that might come across. One of those would be our experience. So that's where we are. I think the school is, folks have been doing a great job in terms of moving forward and paying attention to students' needs and teacher needs. We did meet working with Jenica and the Behavioral Health Center to make sure that we have folks here for the adults, reaching out for our teaching partners at Mount Desert for their experience, and continually having someone around for students that they can come and talk to the variety of supports that they have. And I think that will be ongoing. And so that was a really strong approach. I can't help but thank some of our surrounding schools who offered support to some of their counselors to come on that day, or be ready if we needed more to come. So that was just really important to recognize that as a county and a school community overall, that people are here for us, and likewise we would be there for them.
Yeah.
So is there a time frame in which we could expect that if you get this kind of call like you had on X date, that there would be things that might roll out differently? And obviously one of the big concerns that you hear is communication with parents. And I just will say about that my gut tells me, having had a child in school at one point, that you probably will never get information fast enough and comprehensive enough to deal with the panic you feel. And I don't know, and I recognize that. But at what point would we be able to expect that if an event like that happens again, the communication system and the flow might roll out differently or more effectively, if you think it needs to roll out more effectively?
Are you asking when the board would be updated on that updated?
Yeah, and when things would actually be different, actually, I guess I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think definitely after I know some things that I want to do in terms of
Okay.
Who would I would try to communicate, even if I was, a superintendent, in the same school building where things were occurring, that there are things that I would do differently in terms of getting information out. Definitely, I think, making sure that folks, our current system where we're updating families through our school messenger process and making sure that parents recognize to go on and, double check and make sure that all of their information is correct. Check your spam folder to make sure that messages from the school aren't going there. Sometimes that's been a common occurrence when it's something that's coming from school messenger. The algorithms are so good right now. If there's something that doesn't come often, or only in the wintertime, because that's when you have those emergencies. Sometimes those messages will go right to spam rather than to your email. So that's why having doing both a text and an email is really important, because then hopefully you can begin to go through those steps. There are information partners who are really important to have outside of the school that you could be able to share information that could be able to put bits of information. And there are always times, regardless, unknowing what the next situation might be, where you might be asked to not share anything because of the nature of the situation that might be going. That might heighten it. And so the situations can always change, but I think that there are avenues in which information can go to folks to sort of help, though I don't think you can alleviate it 100%, like you said, Gail. I think that there will always be, but I think there's room for improvement.
Obviously, no one here at the high school signed up to be a press secretary, but I mean, is there any way, if this happens again, unfortunately, that certain, like, you've got superintendent, principal, janitorial, gym teacher, everyone reports to one person, whether it's on their phone or in person, and that one person is the one that's sending out information. So it's not 10 different people sending out something, it's one person. Everyone knows to report their information to that one person. And then they can do an update every half hour, every hour, or release what can be released, because sometimes it's sensitive, and you can't. So I know there was a lot more misinformation floating around that day than there was actual information. So if it comes right from MDI, RSS, and it's this one person that all the parents know is the person that's sending it, might cover it more, I guess.
Yeah. So thank you all. I appreciate getting the feedback from you as well as we go through the process. So I appreciate it. Enrollments that sort of showed that the high school overall in the district were +6. So as you see at your monthly meetings, there's the ebb and flow of folks within the district. School highlights. I sort of talked that I've been, greeting kids in the morning. It's been fun because some teachers would join me, and it's just a really nice way to, if we could say good morning to a kid and have a smile, and that's a way of sort of increasing that connections and those relationships. That's something that I've always been about in my career. So if I could do that here in that little bit, I want to do that in the mornings. It's when I can do it. So it's getting kind of cold, so I kind of moved in. I was in and out today. Within our schools, there were Veterans Day observances that occurred at various schools within the district. I do want to highlight that Trenton received a state grant that's called the RED grant, sort of a reinventing education grant. And more information will be sort of coming out officially. It's a $250,000 grant that Crystal and her crew at Trenton have put together. That's coalesces around a lot of things that we were talking about in terms of social emotional learning and abilities to get kids out in different experiences, utilizing the community resources that we have, from Volta to the Writing Center to other organizations to sort of build resilience for kiddos. So that'll be really exciting as we learn what they're doing in there and see how that's transferable to some of our other schools. So kudos to them. Very exciting that over the weekend, the high school's generator was hooked up and can run if our lights go out. If you know, the lights went out on that third day, we returned to school, and that was a little scary. We didn't know what was going on. We knew that there was some burst in power, but we thought that was isolated to the town of Clinton. But now the generator is ready to go, so if there's something like that happens again, our lights will stay on. The A-team met with staff from Aristic Mental Health to talk about sexual assault awareness. We're going to be trained in that. That video is going to get tweaked and then shared with principals so they can share it with their staffs as sort of that process of how you communicate with individuals when it comes to sensitive information. You know, not only is that training specific to sexual assault, but you know, some of those skills can be used across the board when you know, speaking with students or staff who have had similar concerns. So looking forward to pushing that out. Julie's going to talk a little bit about the 18 retreat that we did just recently in October. And just a reminder, so we do 4 retreats a year as an administrative team to sort of help us move our work forward. We're going in the flow of the cycle of the school. We usually begin in August. We have one in October. We'll have another one in March. And then we sort of wrap up in June, and that's the cycle that we use as we sort of look at the work that we're doing. I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, COVID's still here, so as there's been sort of the ebb and flow, we were green for a little while, and now we're yellow. And when I met with nurses, we're working on, you know, making sure that we have the right amount of masks for staff who wish to have those, so we'll be delivering those. And there's a, you know, at some schools, you know, they'll go a week or so with nothing. They might have a flare up here and there of that. Definitely, there's a lot of stomach bugs. There's RSV. I was hiking with a doctor who used to be live in this district, and they still come up to hike and now live in southern Maine. And you know, we're talking about the cases that are occurring down in southern Maine, and those and some other respiratory illnesses are really, you know, rising to the top in those communities. As Jessica shared, you know, meeting regularly with the MDIEA on that. You know, some of those conversations are and sort of talking about the ambiguity to try to clarify the that process of need. And actually had a conversation last week with the Vice President Cindy, and sort of talking about that process, and then recognizing, you know, wanting to take a look at that so it's clear for members and it's clear for board members as they're going through that process. And thinking about it. For visits, I sort of talked about, you know, at the high school, trying to get in the lunchroom and being out in the morning. You know, I've been to Trenton and Mount Desserts, Trenton in the mornings, I've been in Mount Desert and some of the afternoons. Out at Penatech, when I get to have my first visit to salons on Friday for part of the morning to see kids there and sit on some classes. So excited about that. We'll be doing the budget update during the rest of the meeting. Matt sort of talked about the staff recruiting, and we're having sort of a job fair on the 17th here. I'm really looking forward to that. We also have one of the long-term subs here at the high school who, once we get things settled and we know, who we have as new substitutes, to take a look at the ones that we have coming in to probably doing like an adult ed substitute class through adult ed. That person at the high school here is excited and willing to do that. So hopefully that sort of allows to draw in people and give them a little background on the process of being a substitute. It's quite fun. I haven't done it myself. I wanted to talk a little bit about school facilities. And part of this is recognizing that there hasn't been a lot of sort of feedback in terms of the board of trustees and other boards when I've gone to them individually, knowing what other schools are doing. So part of my standing note to you all will be sort of making sure that we're aware at the AOS of what things are sort of happening at the other schools. Some of those are little and don't necessarily need to be sort of talked about. Some of those are larger, and we're kind of in a space where a lot of those larger projects are starting to come across for a lot of schools. And so I wanted to do my first update to you so you had a sense of what was happening across the district, across the high school, looking at renovations for the library, science rooms and math and the entryway renovations at Conard Emerson. This is a process that has been going on pre-pandemic and then was postponed in terms of either renovating or a new school, and they are back into the swing of that process. The Cameron Associates Tremont School is looking at architects to be hired to look at their space needs. Pematic has ordered and will be receiving a portable. They will deal with those needs, so they have some specific requirements that they're taking a look at. Mount Desert Elementary School is doing some work in conjunction with the town in terms of the garage that's outside of the building and what its needs are now as compared to what it can do now. There's a swimming pool there, and they also have basketball courts. Also taking a look at insulation, windows, some landscaping on the behind the building. So that's a larger project as well that incorporates many aspects of the school, not necessarily full renovation, but there's some significant pieces that are part of that school, and they're working through that process. And then some of the little ones, Trenton is looking at some roof work on their gym. Pematic is looking at first floor and second floor window replacements. Swans, they're looking at their roof and exterior painting at Cranberry Islands. In particular, both of the schools, the biggest projects there are leaks in their basements. And then what that does to the rest of the building in terms of when you have constant water down there. And then Frenchboro right now is sort of looking at, they have a long list of general repairs that they have to go through, nothing as big as some of the others. So each month I'll take a look. If there's really no change, anything new that comes up, I'll be sharing with you all. So there's that kind of information, from the trustees and the other boards with the other school projects. And so you all know what's going on as you're making decisions for your schools.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to correct you on that. You said Pematic is looking at affordable. It's actually.
Oh, should I say Pematic?
Yes,
Tremont.
yeah, Tremont's bringing in affordable to,
Tremont is bringing it.
until we can
Yes,
do
I
it,
know
a
that.
renovation to stem the leak there.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I actually did that.
Yeah, I know.
And Pematic is doing, did I say Pematic first floor and second floor windows?
Yeah, you did. You did. That was correct. Yeah.
And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is, one of my charges in coming in as superintendent has been to take a look at and work in reviewing the supervision and evaluation, and Julie and Rhonda, the admin team, and we already had our teachers meet in the schools to sort of talk about that process. We have been looking at that in terms of the teacher end of it. I've been working with principals and taking a look at and working through our process, that I'll be working with them, tweaking some of the rubrics that are tied to what we're doing with the teachers, but we also have the ITSE rubrics that we have to look at. And then the other piece was the central office evaluations. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that, of what my vision is for that. Typically in this district, which is unlike any place else, is there's this December 1st first look. I think it's called basically it's sort of first look at first consideration for employment that happens. By statute, the superintendent, is the person who evaluates central office staff. And I spent the summer taking a look at some models that exist around, and there's none of this sort of first look in it. It's sort of odd. So I've spoken with the central office staff and asked if they were comfortable, because it's in their contract, that be waived, and we can do that when within them, and do a process of central office evaluations that's sort of more in line with our cyclical process. And that process would be broken up into two. There'd be a professional framework because we have professionals that work in the central office, which would be business manager, which would be Nancy Furlow, operations, which would be Eric Hahn, and technology, which would be Josh Young, which typically aren't, constantly like right at education, in particular at the heart, as you would see with maybe special education or Julie and Rhonda's position or my position in particular. And that framework would focus on leadership, organizational culture. So tying that to what we're already using with our teachers in our professional framework, workplace conduct and professional inquiry. And so there'd be that component of it. And then there'd be the leadership framework, which would be special ed director, Melissa Beckwith, and our directors of curriculum, which are Julie and Rhonda. And those would fall more under the ITSE standards in terms of what that looks like. So there's those two pieces. And then the process would follow. There'd be the goal setting, mid-year review. Then there'd be sort of what's considered 360 feedback that they would go out and pick some feedback. And then also I would take a look at feedback from teachers, board principals, and colleagues. And there's a self-evaluation and a summative. And then I would come back before May, and the board will receive summary performance statements when we're doing that piece that we would share in an executive session. That's a process that, in looking at some of the districts that are similar to ours, that may follow when I was taking a look at summer. And that's the process that I would like to follow with our staff. And so it puts it more in a cycle that sort of is more of a flow and is a little bit more of understanding of, so the board knows what are the pieces that go into that process, because that seems to be something that has been missing as we have been going through there. So that's the process that I would like to follow, sort of moving forward, so you have a better sense of what that looks like.
So traditionally, maybe back in the day, there was an annual meeting in December, and evaluations of individuals were presented one by one in executive session to the AOS board, and contracts get renewed. So I assume the contracts are the contracts renewed in December, or are they renewed in the calendar?
Only mine is in December.
Okay.
That's by statute.
So
Okay,
this
so
would move the contract renewal to line it up better with the school year.
Okay.
Which is a
that
huge
would be fine.
advantage to the.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's my evaluation that is set for that December. Their contracts all run the regular school year.
okay.
Yeah, just like.
Nice. To your point, Neil, I think aligning that cycle with the school year makes it a lot easier to have a constructive process with the board.
Yeah, it's fine. I just have to understand how we were looking at it.
Is that it for your report?
I
Or
would,
you have one question?
that was it, my report.
So can you fill us in, please, on where we are with the electric buses? I feel like I've
Oh.
gotten some differing information on that. Which towns are getting buses?
So, as you know, the state or the federal government put out quite a while ago, there's lots of funds for electric buses. There's a specific process and application that you had to fill out, and Eric did those for all of our schools. But only 2 of our schools were chosen based on whatever criteria the federal government put out there. And those 2 schools are the high school and Hamilton. And so I have looked into some different opportunities that hasn't come through yet, because I know that some schools, just received buses, and other schools will be putting more money in so they can catch up and buy new buses. And whether it was because of our structure that things were chosen differently, I'm not exactly sure what that process was, but I know that of the number of buses we could have gotten, I think there the possibility of 6 that we were only allotted 2. And then whatever their criteria was, it was the high school.
Yeah, it was really strange. Like I read one news report that talked about one town in southern Maine that got like $4.3 million worth of buses, and then other towns are getting, one bus.
Yeah. I have
It's, I
no
don't know how
idea
it was doled out, but yeah,
Neither do I.
yeah, okay, well, thank you, I appreciate the clarification.
Oh, and I guess Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, you remind me, I was gonna ask a question about the superintendent agreements. Report
oh.
that you attached to your report.
Yeah, I'll do that. I was
Okay.
gonna do that next.
Okay.
And before I leave the superintendent's report, hey, it's that season. These are the winter updates that I get when there's a storm coming. So apparently there's a storm coming. But it looks like it's later in the afternoon and probably more soon for us. But they're getting snow. They already got snow up north and more is coming. Apparently.
Great.
Do we know if will we need to make up the day that was, the day after the lockdown?
I will know better in the spring, but I will bring it when I have, when the Hancock County superintendents meet, usually we have Dan Chuda, who is the assistant to the commissioner. And so he is always there to bounce questions off of, so he's gonna, they all know, what our experience was, and so I'll be bringing it up with him after one of those meetings. They wait to have our snow days and all that, and before they'll actually make a final yes or no to us, so, but that's what I'm gonna do. Ask for that.
Do you have a question, Robinson? No, I was clarifying that we already used two, essentially for the power outage for the high school and.
Yep.
Lockdown.
And so superintendent's agreements. And so, I guess to sort of go back in history a little bit, a couple of administrations ago, superintendent's agreements were usually a pretty rare occurrence that occurred within schools. They were happening here and there. And a couple of administrations ago, there was a change in leadership at the state level where school choice was something that was sort of talked about a little bit more and allowed. And so if there was a superintendent's agreement between two schools and two superintendents said no, when it went up to the state, for the most part, they were allowed to go through. And so that created a culture over a number of years of this experience that has occurred. And then so over the years, been trying to make sure that when those occur, that they're thoughtful and there's some purpose behind them. And when I came in, I had a certain number that came along with me. And when you look at what we're doing now, we're actually up more than we were last year in 10. And there's the biggest reasons for those is number one, we passed a policy to allow staff working in schools to be able to bring their children. That accounts for 5 of those of the 10. We also have a superintendent's agreement right now as we're working on an agreement between the Cranberry Islands and Mount Desert, more of a sort of an MOU of a relationship between children, the ability of moving back and forth. But right now, as we're going into this school year, those are superintendent's agreements. So those show up on here. And then we also have a situation of pre-K in Trenton, where part of the MOU with Downey's Community Partners, which is the Head Start, is as you go through the levels of participation, once you have all your Trenton folks who are able to come, then you also have to have the folks who would be in the category to receive either free and reduced lunch with economically they're disadvantaged. You have a certain number of those. And then you can start accepting from other folks in the AOS. And then if the program isn't filled, you can accept students from whether it's Ellsworth or Lemoyne, if you ask. And the numbers in Trenton have been relatively low in terms of providing for the Trenton division. But then you go through that process, which is in their MOU, where there are other communities that are allowed to participate. Even though Ellsworth did have to close their in-school, the Head Start that's within their school because of staffing. Early on, you would think that there would be a huge flood but there had been a number of students. And then, you know, that is something that I have a conversation with the school principal. They talk with their teacher. I speak with Downey's community partners and Head Start to make sure that, you know, that it fits with our program and then being able to accept those students. So the numbers in terms of picking up is some of those factors are some that we created and are part of policies that we have. But it is something that, you know, I've been taking seriously, and I have said no to some and I have said yes to some because of circumstances.
You have a question?
I did, I can't, we discussed this in our local meeting, I think at the end of last year.
Yeah,
And one of the things we talked about, and I don't think we got, was a breakdown of what, of the number of kids that have special services. Because there's if I remember correctly, there's a tuition formula that doesn't take that into effect, but obviously for our school and for Connors. I think you said, Ed, you thought off the top of your head it was more than 50%, so that's obviously a higher resource strain than what the
with the
formulaic tuition would be. So there was some discussion about maybe revisiting that from a budgetary standpoint.
yeah, I'll go back and look at that. And that's something I put on in January. To talk about that a little bit more to see what that looks like. I'll do that. So we'll put that on January. So it's great.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the superintendent report? Okay, that brings us to directors of teaching and learning and. Ready to take it away?
Ready, I'm brief. I basically write everything I wish to report out to you in the November note. So if you've had that and read it, then you're up to speed. I'll just highlight, the retreat we just recently had. We're trying to balance in-person meetings with online meetings. And so we regularly have a weekly administrative team meeting. An hour of it is business side with Mike, and an hour is teaching and learning side with Rhonda and myself. But when it comes to these deeper dives, we try to schedule these regular retreats so we can do really deep, thoughtful work. And during that day, you know, we had our coach that we've contracted with to support individual building-based work as it relates to MTSS, which is multi-tiered systems of support. But simply when kids aren't learning, what are we doing about it and how are we supporting them? And then we also spent a considerable amount of time on the PG process, which is performance evaluation and professional growth. What I mean by that is we watched videos of teaching, we looked at our frameworks, we took our new forms and said, how would we fill these out so that we would feel comfortable with our new frameworks before actual implementation. So you may notice that, you know, we are kind of reporting out on the same thing, but the same things are complicated, and we're being very deliberate and methodical in moving forward with that work. And I do feel like our principals have reported out, they feel like they're moving forward and they're getting some real traction. So that's good to hear. It's also, you know, just a personal reflection when we were debriefing, you know, the lockdown experience with our administrative team. You know, we were talking about the changing landscape of the job, and you know, it was not lost on the group that they were now going after this debrief going to go back and do their MTSS meetings and also their PEPG stuff. And it's a lot on our principals, and I just want to acknowledge that they're taking this work really seriously because they know this work is really important, and they're enveloping quite a bit along the way. So I did want to acknowledge that. One thing I did highlight in the note is I put a little hyperlink on multi-language, multilingual learners. That's something that you're going to see in the budget side when we talk about budget, and I know Mike's going to cue me in on that to talk about our needs with supporting multilingual learners. But that is the new language the state is putting forth, so I did want to just put a little hyperlink to that so you could refer to it. It was often past language was English as a second language, but the language is shifting to either English language learners or English learners or multilingual learners. So you could hear a lot of those being thrown around, but the state has chosen MLL, and the intent is because it's trying to reframe what's considered a deficit, right, to an asset-based approach. So it's a good thing to know more than one language. And we know that we have challenges with multilingual learners that need specific support. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But if there are any questions about the note.
in general, I struggle to keep up with the amounts.
It's okay.
All of them. But I get, and in a global sense, I get the feeling or the impression that most of it is about how you teach. And I wonder if what the conversations are with different groups of teachers about what should, or, I mean, that's simplistic, I don't think.
It's not, and I think I'm just gonna reframe it a little bit and see if I'm speaking to what you're saying. And that is really the intent behind us creating all those content studies, was that's the real, okay, now what's our scope and sequence? What are the topics we're going to be exploring? What are the literacy strategies we're going to be teaching kids? How are we going to be teaching them this mathematical process in a workshop model? I mean, that's all the how, right? And our principals are hosting those conversations. I can't even host all of those conversations because there's so many of them. And that's why we really went with kind of an empowered teacher approach to facilitate those on a smaller scale, so they could get grade level specific conversations and content level specific conversations to really tackle that. And then we have kind of a communication of ebb and flow between that teacher leader and then either Rhonda or myself. So that has been sort of our tactic to get that done thoughtfully. And we're quite pleased with that approach. We couldn't have possibly moved at this quick of a clip without that.
I'm just curious, Julie, how many multilingual learners do we have in our school system? Is it a large
Well, okay, I'll
percentage
just
that
give
we've
it
had? Oh, sorry.
No, it doesn't matter. Then I'll be done. Just to give you, currently we have 21 identified. Now, just so you know, basically, every family does a little screener at the beginning of the year, and then they're identified as being needed a further screener. And then once that happens, they're identified as needing or not needing services. And then there's a follow-up in January. Currently, we have a person who is working at 30% of a position to facilitate this. And basically, it's a consult model. So they facilitate the screening, they identify the students. They basically write a workup, a recommendation of this is the kinds of supports this student needs, and then they give it to the classroom teachers. And then they follow up again with a subgroup to do growth screening in January. And that's all we've done. 5 years ago, we had 11 students, and now we have 21. 5 years ago, we did not give, we might have had a little bit of direct services, but very little. And that was already identified as not good enough, because 11 students might not seem like a lot, but high need 11 students spread out over a district, really 30% was insufficient. Now we're at 21. And it's becoming more and more of a clamor, particularly in the region. I'm part of the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association. We're all talking about how we're supporting our MLL students. And it really warrants a full-time position.
Any other questions? Okay, that brings us to subcommittee updates, which is reorganization and policy.
In reorganization, one of the cool things about our plus program that now has all of our students and all of our routes in it, as we can thinking about transportation district wide, is the program identifies every student by grade and sort of where they live. And so when you're thinking about reorganization, whatever that looks like, if you want to be able to take a look at a variety of models, you can go into that program and then start to tease out where people live, how many of them would go to a particular school, and what that could look like as you're, just thinking about models, and what sort of could be. And so that's one of the things that I have tasked Rob to be working on. He now has only access to that, but he's able to manipulate and take a look at different models of what things might look like in terms of what reorganization could be. That would then go out to a future RPC. part of our work was to kind of make sure that we put together all of those pieces, so all of that information was there for that group when it comes time. So that's sort of the biggest pieces that we've been working on. We had to move a meeting because of the events here at the high school. And so that meeting has been adjusted, and so we'll begin sort of that process of looking at what we can do with that, and to sort of develop a little bit more of a timeline so folks have a sense of when's the endpoint and what we will deliver to the group that we ultimately need to make the decision.
I would say we're sort of our, and people in terms of the time, our subcommittee is. We've been the data collectors and we're getting to the point of that and then moving on to this RPC thing. So we're sort of in that finishing off phase. Any questions about that? Hey, policy committee.
There's some updated policies here. We have to move a meeting, and I still have to work on our next upcoming meeting, and I'll have information there. We did get a staff member who's going to join us, and that's Kelly Sanborn, who's going to be joining from the staff. So we're trying to increase the numbers of folks who are coming. And I put that out at one of our meetings with the association to have a staff member available to do a look at that. So that's exciting to have some other people joining that committee in the work, especially teachers, because the policy that directly impacts a lot of what they do with students. So it'd be nice to have folks on that team.
Any questions for policy? What's the date of the next? Oh, you said it was moving.
So, I have to
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
great. No. Well, I'll watch your emails for that. If it's interesting. So discussion items, the fiscal year 24 draft budget.
And I'm going to start with the review sheet first, and then we'll go to the line by line. Come on, that one's coming on. You don't have that. It went the other way. It went the other way. So we'll get on the budget review sheet. So we'll start there at the top, and that's something that will bring in going forward and looking at the rest of the budget. So right at the top, just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of the timeline. And so we sort of did our preliminary budget. Last time we met, we're on to our draft budget this month, and then you can see the dates for the upcoming meetings. If you recalled from our time last month with carryover, we didn't have our proposed, but as you can see right now, what I'm proposing for carryover into next year's budget is $92,962, saving out $100,000. the reason for that, you heard your principal talk about that in terms of, what, not wanting to have a cliff. And we do have some additions that'll be coming in the next budget for next year in terms of personnel. And by having that carryover save will sort of help not create a cliff. And so trying to make sure that we are even across the board. I'll talk a little bit more about that. For our district assessment, you can see what it actually was in 2021, our current assessment, and then the proposed assessment. The number below the proposed assessment is what the increases for this year in terms of what the schools in the district are being assessed for AOS services. And below that, I added a chart that looks at budget to budget and our AOS assessment in percentages over the last 3 years. So in 21-22, it's about 5%, hedging on 6. Last year with some of the increases that we need to make. You can see our budget to budget increase was 8% and our assessment to AOS was 11%. This year, I've been trying to, keep it as flat as possible in terms of what the needs might be at the other schools in terms of what their needs are. And so, the budget is at a budget to budget of 4.3 right now, and our assessment is at 5.5. Now, in terms of where those increases come from, as we go through sort of the cost center reviews, which are broken down on the spreadsheet, Julie talked a little bit about moving our multilingual learners position to 50% and splitting that with the high school. She talked a little bit about the fact that we're looking for more of the increased instruction for those students beyond just creating some of the help for teachers and providing them some things that they can do in the classroom. But we're noticing that some of our students need a little bit more than that in terms of being able to have access to the curriculum. And so part of their time would be at the high school, and then half of the time would be for the AOS as a whole. And then you can see that what that total would be, and that's reflected in the budget when we get to that sheet. And those increases within student staff support within the office, I can feel the other increases are salary and benefit. On the backside of the review sheet, under system administration, which includes the office of the superintendent, the business office, and operations, you'll see increases in the spreadsheet on legal services. Part of that is because we'll be moving into negotiations again, starting in the spring as that process begins. And funds for that process of AOS reorganization. There's some legal fees sort of tied to that. And then in general, salary benefits make up the remainder of those increases. And we added a bit of money to supplies for the operations division. Under student staff support, which is technology, the technology specialist, that's sort of Tom, who's been working in a variety of the schools and providing support for the hardware part of the schools in terms of making sure that computers are working and some of that hardware equipment is working. Those funds right now, he is able to be paid through our SR2 and SR3 funds, but next year that will be going into our budget. Hence the need to want to maybe keep a little more of that carryover again to make sure that when we look at the budget for next year, we're not looking at cliff. And of course, any increases in that line would be cost per shield and salary increases. Special education office, really no change in, except for salaries and benefit increases that exist there. Special education, this is the budget. You recall, we had 2 positions and they were paid for by a variety of funds. And Nancy, if I mess up, sort of let me know. A lot of that had been some of our community partners, so the Family Center, the MDI EDF fund, some of our ESSER funds, the Tremont School Fund also helped to support those positions. And this was a year that those supports dried up, and then we are moving into placing them into our budget. So that position now will be fully staffed within our budget. And then occupational therapists, again, any of those increases will be salaries and benefits. We did have, unfortunately, our OT is resigning and moving on. It's really a great thing for them and where they're going and what the needs are for us. And so when we're looking at our budget, we want to make sure that any of those increases sort of match what the needs of the for another for the team. And then the bottom, and then with special education, also our social worker, will be no change in what their percentages. That Edie Dubois, who part of her time is at Connors Emerson, and then she also supports the counselors district-wide in her position here. And then at the bottom of that sheet, I just rule out what the assessment is, so people remember how that assessment works. There is that 0.5% of just the sort of the pay to play for all of our schools that participate in the AOS, and then the formula is around staff size, total budget, and enrollment. That makes up what the portion of what each school pays into the AOS. And so the biggest pieces in this budget that for those increases, would be the 30,000 for the multilingual learner, and then the additions to would include the psychological examiner in the budget. Other than that, for the most part, we're able to hold the line on budget overall for the AOS. Like I said, part of that's because of the needs that we're seeing in the elementary schools, and what your budgets will need to cover in the coming years.
I asked about the social worker line. I know in the past, Tremont had paid a bigger portion of that because we were getting a percentage of that person supposedly assigned to the Tremont school, and then we hired our own social worker. So is that still going to be 100% position based on using the time at Tremont?
Yes, it's still 100% position.
80% at Bar Harbor, and only 20% for the whole AOS. The rest of
So
the
she was
AOS.
just spending a little more time AOS wide. And I think there's, one of the things we talk about at the AOS level is that there's these ebbs and flows of needs. And so for a period of time, he was doing a lot of work to support Tremont in their time, and it's, depending on what the need is in terms of multilingual learners. You might have a school where there are an influx of people for a little while, and it might shift to another school in terms of making sure that we're sort of taking care of this. So there might be times where the school might not have the need for the multilingual learner, but somewhere along the line they will. I think it's really important that we have the resources to support those teachers, because you never know when an individual population. Yeah.
Nancy, help me understand the legal line. I don't understand the 90,186 encumbered in 2021. Is that
Those funds that we had left over in the 2021 year, that actually we're gonna have to pay for some of the costs that we incurred in 21-22. So we actually encumbered some of those funds to go forward to help pay for, because we knew that the expenses were gonna be very high for 21-22. So that's just a note to let everybody know.
so? Our actual expenses were 54,000.
The actual, yes,
But we
the
didn't budget that
actual,
one, is that-
there was the encumbered funds were actually deducted from that amount.
Okay.
Any other questions, Marie?
What are the supplies for the operations person?
That would be the general supplies that you would need for the office right now. when we look back over when that position was created, there was no, everybody's office had a little bit of a supply line, whether that's for, buying files or any other needs that they have in their office to be able to run their office.
So it's not office, I mean, what would be outside of, isn't it office supplies? I guess. I don't see it in anybody else's line. I'm not trying to be picky, but
Yes, each section has, basically office supplies. Or it may be listed as just supplies or, but each section has supplies.
I see office supplies. so.
What section?
It would be the Office of the Superintendent System Administration. Goes about.
Supplies and- And some of that is like, he has to get math and stuff. he has to-
That's news to me. It's so stupid.
What's the office rent for?
Oh,
They rent about base-
We rent the space that we're in at the high school. From the high school. Yeah, the AOS doesn't own anything. Yep.
That's what.
And so we rent that space. from the high school.
Tenants at will.
We are tenants.
Well, there's your budget gap, folks, a problem.
Any other questions for the budget?
And please, if you have, as we go through the process, as you guys go through and you have questions, please send those to me as we move through the process. So I know you'll be taking it, as we look at it. Down to mine, just be to contact me.
So next we have first reading of revisions to policy JICIA, weapons, violence, bullying in school safety. And people may remember that we were rationalizing this policy to align with our other updated policies on harassment and related policies. So we won't, this is a first reading, we'll take comments and then it'll come to the next meeting for adoption.
One of the things that we put in at the policy committee, when you get down to for the first page of the prohibited conduct under G, one of the things that came out of some of the work from the springtime is folks would go to a policy and it might say bullying or harassment, and then they wouldn't say much there, and they wouldn't know where to go. So at the policy committee, one of the members sort of talked about putting right next to those resources. So if someone was reading through the bullying behavior on one of when they got to the end of that, there were direct links to the specific bullying policies where there are the procedures that they would need to do. So rather than them going to the end and then reading through that it's more directly linked to some of those, and we did that in some of the other policies. So that is sort of one of the changes that occurred along with some of the other language pieces. I think we talked a little bit about that.
And some linking of related policies
Yeah.
early on, if you were like not sure which policy your circumstance might go with, you could work on a related policy. And then. Marie.
One of the things, I was in the last policy committee on this, so, but I didn't suggest this, maybe I did, I don't remember. Anyway, one of the things that I liked about this, thank you for linking, you just talked about the linking of the
Yeah.
related policies, so that, and the reporting form. I think, I was also very much involved in the staff conduct with students. For one, the redo of that, and now I'm looking at that and realizing I think that in the same way that in that policy at the very end, we link this policy, the JICIA, weapons, violence, and school safety, bullying for students. I think we should as well link the staff conduct with students policy to this one as well.
Right,
Um,
yes, I think that,
It's not in
it
here.
doesn't show up here, but it isn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so I have a comment about I'll talk to you off another time about the other one, but it's something we similarly just passed, but that was my one comment on that. Thank you.
And then one other piece, did you talk about that line adjustment piece on the? Sorry. No.
I did not talk about that yet. Oh, we had moved, in the old policy, there was a specific relation under, conduct that involved possession of a knife, while on NDI RSS, property. In fact, a couple of policy, conversations, we sort of talked about how restrictive that was in terms of, schools that have kids who fish and do other things, and sometimes it might just be in their backpack because they forgot, and the 5-day suspension by just having possession seemed a little draconian in terms of how it's used. And so, in a bunch of discussions going back and forth, number one, under L, it was sort of under the prohibited conduct, but it also gave, what the discipline was. So we actually moved that and changed the language at the policy committee, and you can see it's under disciplinary action 3 and highlighted in yellow. After discussions with the committee members, what we thought would be a little bit more appropriate than providing some I keep the words used leeway, but some discretion, that's a better word.
Like this, yeah, the administrator should be able to say like, oh, well, this tiny pocket knife fell out of your backpack. You're not gonna be an automatic 5-day suspension, but clearly if you were doing something threatening with a knife, that would.
That would result in that or more. So we thought it would be a better place where it was, and then
The other piece of this.
talked about the other changes. Condition of language on evaluation means psychological evaluation or risk assessment of risk, but that encumber those of the, the term.
Any more questions about this policy? And if you think of something, you can send it before the next meeting for us. For this month. Okay, that brings us to action items. The first one is that Bar Harbor board member Dwayne Holt resigned for personal reasons, and he was the secretary, which is a position that mostly doesn't have a lot of work to do. But if Selena were not able to be here, technically speaking, that is, I believe, the person who would take the minutes. So
Your vacation.
that hasn't happened in my time, but that is technically speaking what would happen. So is there so we're looking for a new secretary if there is are any nominations for this position.
Anybody want to do it?
Does anyone want to be the secretary?
It's a great title.
It's limited work.
Signing warrant.
I don't warrant, that's right. Oh, at the
Oh, at the, yeah.
annual budget, sign the warrant.
Resume builder.
That's real. The question is, are you gonna draw names out of a hat if no one says for you?
Yeah. Our Colin Holding, one in a second here. Is there anyone here who's dying to be the AOS secretary? Aaron, I hear you talking over there.
Oh, my
How do I know? Yeah, I could do it. I don't
Okay.
want that.
I nominate. Okay, all in favor? Okay, congratulations.
Nominate.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Taking that on. That brings us to first and final reading of revisions to policies. JKA expulsion of students, JKER expulsion guidelines, JLTVE, AOS 91 medication authorization form. Now, my understanding is that the expulsion ones are mostly legal law changes.
There were law changes as we look back on some of those policies that were moved to law. There's a bunch that still are catching up, and this one was one of them. And the changes are mostly in language, but not necessarily, there's no change in terms of the procedures or anything like that. And so it's just making sure that our language is in accordance with the law. One of the big changes in terms of identifying, if you recall, we talked about discipline, and then you couldn't have suspensions or expulsions for kids in grade 5 or below. So we sort of, we're looking at those other different policies that talked about suspensions. We forgot to add that language into this one. And then there was the discretion of the superintendent under law to provide alternatives to expulsion on a case-by-case basis. That was kind of there, buried in the old policy, but it was made more specific in law. And then the other pieces for JKE are just additions to language, but no additions to the idea of a written notice and what needs to be there. They just change the language a little bit. And that's the same for the procedures piece as well. There's just some changes in the particular language, but the procedures itself are very different than they were. So
Yeah.
do you want to move the two of those?
That's
Do you want
what
to
I mean,
add
two expulsion.
the two expulsion?
Yeah.
Okay. And to approve revisions to JKE and JKER.
Any discussion?
I just said, and I emailed Mike this when he said this, because I had a couple of questions, but it would be useful, I think, on these policies to either in the body of the agenda or the policy itself to note that it's been reviewed by council, and also if it's been reviewed by the policy committee. I know these weren't reviewed by the policy committee, but I think at the time that I emailed you, these had not been reviewed by council yet, but now they have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
At the time we received them, they had not. And I wrongly assumed that that would just be helpful. And then I still have the question or the concern that in the first paragraph that we're changing from and eliminating all reference to due process into the main statute, which is still in effect. And it's still on Drummond Woodson's website, like their policy for this still includes this reference. So I guess I don't understand why we're eliminating, because due process, the words themselves don't appear anywhere else in either of the two documents, but it is literally in the main statute. Is called 8A due process standards for expulsion proceedings, and then in the main statute, it says due process 3 more times, but in our two documents, it's not referred to at all.
When I spoke to Art Drummond and Woodson, and this policy is from them, in terms of looking at it, that because that AA is actually the notice of hearing, that process is the due process that's described in the law. So it didn't need to be identified in terms of the policy because you're doing it as part of the process.
No, I get that I understand that it's implicit, but I guess from a unforced error standpoint, why would we remove the explicit that we're providing the student due process? Because I get that all the procedures underneath of it, but the statute literally says it 3 times, like why would we remove all references to it in our policy?
Standards the way it's printed.
Hmm?
I should write the statute the way it's printed from the state, right?
But it's not in this, right, it's such an important bedrock of our legal system, I don't know why we take that out in reference to due process.
Yeah. So, when I asked, they said that they're like, oh, it's not necessary because you're doing it as part of that, so it doesn't need to be referenced.
Well, that's the most important answer. But the other thing is, if you actually read the language as it exists and the language that you're crossing out, it doesn't really add anything. Following a proper investigation of a student's behavior and due process proceedings conducted in accordance with 28 that doesn't make a lot of sense. The way it was worded. And it also, again, the guidelines lay out the due process. And it also is, due process is mentioned at the beginning of the expulsion guidelines, not the expulsion of students. So students aren't losing anything from a due process point of view. Nor would we want to ratify that.
Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor of adopting this motion? Okay, that brings us to JLCD medication authorization.
When I met with the nurses as they were reviewing, the standing orders piece, and I think we passed that, last time around, there's the authorization form that sort of goes along with it. And the other one was a bit confusing, so they put this one, together that's built from the state version. And, so they felt that this would be better, it was a little bit more clear in terms of its usage, so. That's the one I was suggesting. And the policy committee.
That is your JLCD, AOS manual medication authorization form.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, so, any other business?
Nancy,
Okay,
um, oil.
right.
So as you know, heating fuel is a volatile. It's costly. The heat it produces. So we have to go out to bid for what we need, but of course, price and all is going to be a factor of how quickly we can respond. So after Nancy and I spoke, we thought it would be prudent to, when we send out the bid for the process, and as soon as we get those bids back, it would be really helpful if I'm able to act on the bid price, once we see it, rather than wait for a board meeting to do it. So I was going to ask for authorization to authorize the superintendent to accept. I don't know, just low bids on
Number two meeting.
number 2 heating oil, and to be able to choose the bidder that best meets the needs of the district.
Yeah, you want me to describe that in my motion? I just move
I think it can be moved as,
authorization for superintendent as described.
yeah.
for-
Second.
Any discussion? Yeah,
Do we normally do this time of year? It seems so late.
Usually, well, it's been late like last year, but before that, we had done it earlier, but we had been kind of had the input from people that it was not the time to do it, but hindsight's 2020. You know, it was, he thought it was gonna go as high as it has, so we're looking into like a round plus. Instead of a fixed, nobody's gonna give it a fixed price, or if they do, they'll give you one, but it's outrageous. So at this point, it's, that's what we're looking for.
sorry.
So who are we looking to for recommendations on these prices? Because I'd love to make them myself.
It goes out
Our
to.
suppliers, our suppliers, we kind of look to, for information, but we go out to a variety of, businesses that we think there's 6 different, heating oil vendors that we go to ask for the.
Anyone else? Okay, all in favor? Okay, any other business? The future agenda items. I know Michael bring back a update on the safety plan changes. Of course, we'll do our budget work, and we'll have the polling policy.
And I'll do this, you can put under discussion item, I'll do the, taking a look at superintendent's agreements and special education impacts.
Is there any other public comment? Okay, our next meeting will be Monday, 12th December, will be the regular meeting, and then the 15th will be the annual meeting. March of calendars for this upcoming meeting.
We have a time on the annual meeting. I got the time of 6 p.m. from for the budget meeting. In January, but we have a time for the annual.
30, right? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, all in favor?